All right, as we get started this morning, let me invite you to join me over in Titus, please. Let's look at Titus chapter 3. And we're just going to really focus on one phrase we find there in Titus chapter 3 and just kind of remember the context here. We have the Apostle Paul under the guidance of the Holy Spirit writing to a younger gospel preacher. And so he is giving him instructions with regards to his ministry, his work. Also, you find in Titus, for instance, qualifications for elders and deacons. And so you can see, the focus really is on Titus's effectively accomplishing this work as a gospel preacher, as an evangelist of the glad tidings to be found in Jesus Christ. And so in that context, Paul is going to commission him to do things that he should be regularly fulfilling. And so look there in chapter 3 and verse 1. Put them, and so the them obviously would be the congregation to which he would be preaching, other Christians that would be coming under his influence, but put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates. Now, key in on this one, to be ready to every good work. And so I might look at this from two different perspectives. I have a responsibility as a preacher of the gospel to make sure I'm doing this. I am putting before those that I'm preaching to or teaching this responsibility to be ready to every good work. But also, as a Christian, I need to make sure that I am among those who are ready, prepared to every good work. Now, just hearing that, every good work, obviously those good works are defined for us in the pages of God's Word. In fact, if you were to go back to 2 Timothy chapter 3, you might remember those familiar verses as it relates to the Word of God. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God. And you remember it says that the man of God may be perfect, complete, thoroughly furnished unto every good work. I believe I've read some other translations that have prepared thoroughly to every good work, or perfectly to every good work. And so again, it's the idea these Scriptures are capable of preparing us. And one of the things that they would do is inform us of those good works, every one of them, that we are to be prepared for. And I just thought that language might serve well to reintroduce our series that we entered into a couple of weeks back. Because here's the question, as you see in red in the middle of the board, that really I want us to direct our attention. Are you ready? Are you ready? And again, not to discount my accountability in that. Am I ready? Now again, we are, as Christians, to be ready to every good work. But I want us to focus in on this one that we find here listed as a challenge. But friends, this challenge, I think we would easily agree, it constitutes a good work as Christians that we ought to be ready to perform. Because the challenge is living godly in an ungodly world. Well, I hope you're still there in Titus, because now back up to chapter 2. And you might remember immediately prior to Paul saying, put them in mind to be ready to every good work, he will tell them about the grace of God and how that it has brought salvation to all. And notice there verse 11 of chapter 2, for the grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness. And so it is as though Paul is acknowledging we are going to be exposed to, we are going to be operating in an environment of ungodliness, an ungodly world. We're supposed to deny ungodly and worldly lust. And what is our responsibility? What is the work that we're supposed to be doing? We should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. So, I believe Paul is saying this would constitute one of those good works that we should be readying ourselves to do. We need to be ready to live godly. And in doing so, we need to acknowledge our godly living is going to have to be done in the midst of an ungodly world. So again, question, are you ready? Am I ready? Again, especially for the wins, the R is not just shorthand. I use the R there instead of ARE because each of our points is going to begin with the letter R, and these are an incomplete list. This is an incomplete list, but these are, in my judgment, some indispensable criteria, preparations, if you will, to being ready and willing and able to live godly in an ungodly world. That's a challenge, isn't it? That's a challenge. We've already defined what a challenge is. Anything as a demanding task that calls for special effort or dedication. Friends, this is a work. This is a good work. But it's a challenge. Living godly in an ungodly world is going to be a task that calls for special effort and dedication. So are you ready? Others have done it. We've given notice to several of those, and we should find encouragement in that, take hope in that. But that doesn't answer the question for each of us. Am I ready? Am I ready to do it? It can be done, but am I ready to meet and overcome this challenge of living godly in an ungodly world? First thing I suggested are we need to recognize some things. We need to recognize the significance of what it means to be godly and ungodly. And again, at the beginning of last week, we wanted to call attention to this important recognition. Today, godliness finds itself defined by some very, limited parameters. And we looked at 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses really 15 down through the end of the chapter, 15 and 16, where we are told that godliness today is to be in Christ Jesus. Only those who are Christians today. And that is, as we are told in verse 15 of that text, 1 Timothy chapter 3, that is to be a member of God's household in the church. And those who are behaving ourselves as we should. Faithful Christians, faithful members of the Lord's church, exclusively today are the godly. And so if we're going to live godly, we have to be among the godly. And so I just want us to understand that that's part of the recognition. But then this challenge, who the godly are, who the ungodly are, what that means, how they present themselves, and the challenges, friends, this is literally the challenge that we are called upon by God in living this earthly life. I mean, this is the social construct, if you will. This is the framework for living in this world. Why we are here is to prove that we can and choose to live godly, fear God, keep His commandments among those who generally refuse to fear God, deny God and His right to govern our lives. Because that's why this challenge is so universal. Friends, this has always been a challenge. It's a challenge for us, yes, but it's always been the challenge for those who would fear God and keep His commandments. Because the majority of people, every person has to make a choice, whether they're going to be among the godly or the ungodly. But the challenge comes in because in every generation, most people are going to choose this. Most people are going to align themselves with the ungodly. And so the challenge is, here I am among the minority. I'm among the few that have gone in the straight gate, traveling the narrow way. I'm of the few, but I'm living among the many who are constantly opposing me, trying to make it more difficult for me to live that godly life. And that's what makes it a task that demands special effort, special dedication. And so the first thing we have to do is recognize. Secondly, are you ready? It's going to take resolve. Great resolve. The idea of determination, fixed, unwavering determination. We see that among some who were able to live godly in very ungodly worlds, such as Daniel and Joseph. They had the type of resolve that we as God's people today must exercise if we are going to meet and overcome this challenge, because theirs was a determination that they had prepared, purposed in their heart long before they ever came to the test. Theirs was a resolve that said, I cannot, not I should not, I cannot do that. And that's the type of resolve it's going to take for us. And sadly, we think of New Year resolutions. Maybe that's how we think of resolves. And too often, those are kind of met with indifference and a lack of determination, and often are broken. But if we're going to be successful in this challenge, we can't have a New Year resolution mentality about this resolve. It has to be fixed. It has to be determined. And then we took a little time to look at Jesus' parable of the soils, because I think it's very enlightening here. Jesus gives 3 soils that were able to bear spiritual life, but of those 3, only one ultimately bore fruit to eternal life and to the glory of God. What happened to the other 2? The stony ground, the ground that was encumbered with thorns, what happened to it? Lack of resolve. Persecution, affliction, cares and responsibilities of life, these things distracted those who had already shown spiritual life, but they became distracted by an ungodly world. And therefore they did not bear fruit to God's glory or to eternal life. Now, friends, the good soil still had those potential distractions. They still were part of that living in that ungodly world, but they would not be distracted. Why? Their resolve was fixed. All right, so quickly, let me suggest a third this morning, and that is we're going to have to resist. Friends, living godly in an ungodly world will demand resisting. Specifically, resisting the devil. Now, that shouldn't surprise us. We've already noted that he's called the God of this world. 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 4. Why? Because most give their allegiance to him. He's not the God of this world because he created it. He's not the God of this world because he has given us life. He's not the sovereign of the universe. But it is appropriate, I guess, to call him the God of this world because most in the world give their allegiance to him. Look to him. But being styled the God of this world, certainly he is that spiritual force that is leading the assault against God's people who are trying to live godly lives. One of the designations that we find for the devil in the Bible is Satan. You're familiar with that, right? Satan. That word literally means adversary. Another word would be opponent. It designates an enemy. It designates somebody who is contending, opposing us. And so the devil, yes, he is opposed to God, but because he is opposed to God, he is opposed to all those who are godly. So here is the one who is opposing us in our effort to live godly. What are we going to have to do? If we're going to meet this challenge, we're going to have to resist him. We're going to have to resist him. Now, Christians are called upon to do that in very succinct language. A couple of places, but let's look at 2 of them quickly. Look at Romans, if you will. I'm talking about Romans. James, I meant to say. Look at James, please, chapter 5. James chapter 4. I can't get anything right. James chapter 4, because James here is going to call upon Christians to resist the devil. I mean, in those very words. So look there in James chapter 4. We'll read verse 7. It starts with a counterpart. Submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil. And then we have this promise, and he will flee from you. Friends, this is one of those occasions where a word study would really benefit us and profit us in our understanding what this command requires of us. Now, I think we have some general idea of what it means to resist something. But I do really think to better comprehend what this word meant to the original reader will help us better understand what they recognized their responsibility was here. And in doing that, I believe it will enhance our appreciation for the seriousness of this challenge, the gravity of it. And so I'm going to call upon somebody who knows far more about the original language than I do, Brother Woods in his commentary. But listen, if you will, with regards to his comments concerning resist. First of all, we should understand that the word itself in the original is a compound word. In other words, it's made up of two parts. And those two parts would be stand and against. So again, if you were an individual who spoke the Koine Greek and you heard this word for resist, you would recognize that it has two subwords or has two parts making up that word. One of those words would be for stand, and the other one is to stand against. But listen, please, to what Brother Wood says about that word in its original usage. He says, quote, "This word has a military connotation. It was frequently used of those who placed themselves in battle array against an enemy and held their ground." You see how that suggests stand against? And again, think about that in light of who we're called upon to resist. The devil. Who is he? Say, he's our adversary. He's our enemy. And so, again, an individual speaking Koine Greek would hear that term and connect it to its military connotation, and they would understand that speaks to an individual who would arm themselves in battle array and then stand against the enemy in warfare, in battle. Now, Brother Woods is going to take the meaning, the literal meaning to that word and make its application to how it is being used here by James. And so he goes on to say, by way of application, we are, as Christians, we are therefore to face Satan, the adversary, the enemy, in battle array. We are to recognize him as a formidable and dangerous enemy and to fight off all of his advances. Listen to this. All is at stake in the effort. The issues are life and death. Man must stand against. He must resist Satan or be taken captive by him. There is no armistice, no terms of amnesty offered. It is a war of survival. End of quote. Does that help us understand the gravity of this challenge? Does that better help us appreciate what this command calls upon us to do, to resist the devil? Friends, it's to go to battle with him. It's to stand against him. Recognizing this is a battle for our souls. Our eternal destiny rests on how we fare in this war. As Brother Woods expressed it, this is a matter of life and death. This is a battle for survival. Now, if you have a ribbon, please mark there. We're going to come back to James in just a minute. But let's notice another place that, once again, Christians are called upon to do this very thing. Resist the devil. This time we go to the inspired penman Peter. And look over in 1 Peter, if you will, 1 Peter chapter 5. Peter again is going to employ that same term. So please keep in mind what it means in the original language. But he here, in prescribing how we are to prepare for and how we are to respond to the devil's attacks, this apostle, he's going to do so by borrowing graphic imagery from the animal kingdom. Now remember, James couched it in the context of warfare, a battlefield, a soldier standing against an enemy. But here Peter is going to employ again the same original word, but he's going to put it in the context of the animal kingdom. He's going to remind us of the devil's intent to devour us. Friends, that word in the original literally means to swallow up. And you think about a lion and what it would do to prey. And he tells us we need to resist. So look there with me, 1 Peter chapter 5. I think there are familiar verses. Be sober. The idea is have your mind always mentally alert. You cannot inebriate yourself with the things of life. You can't lose focus. You have to remain sober, which allows you to be watchful, vigilant, constantly alert, attentive. Why? Because there he is, your adversary, your opponent, your enemy, the devil, as a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour, whom resist. There it is again. Steadfast in the faith. Resist. Now, friends, when you take those two passages together, I hope it impresses upon us the seriousness of this chapter. Friends, this is literally a matter of life and death. And because of the gravity of the challenge, because of the seriousness of the challenge, it should arouse us to the most diligent effort to do this very thing: resist. Stand against the enemy. And again, I invite your attention to the imagery that is used by both James and Peter. In either of those scenarios, let's take the first one. Take a battlefield and think of yourself as a soldier on that battlefield. And imagine being wearied from warfare, being tired, wanting a break. Imagine taking off your armor, going into your foxhole, sleeping, being unattended for a while, and when you wake up and you look up, there is the enemy standing above you. Either ready to kill you or to take you captive. But we understand, because he did not resist, because he was not prepared, because he had not readied himself to stand against the enemy and became unattentive, look what happened. We know how that would end. That would end tragic, possibly fatal. Take the other scenario. Now, instead of a battlefield, think about an African savanna. And think about, if you will, a prey that has become separated from the flock, unattentive. Maybe it has become, distracted, because of some succulent grassland, or maybe there is fresh water and it goes over there away from the flock. And because it is so enamored by what it's doing, eating, grazing, drinking, it is no longer watchful. It is no longer attentive to its surroundings. And if you've ever watched any of those National Geographics, Ricky, you know what happens, right? The lioness is prowling, waiting to find that unsuspected prey. How does it end? How does it end? It's destruction. It's devouring. It's fatal. And so since the Bible presents both of those by way of imagery, in the context of urging us to resist, stand against, be watchful, be always vigilant, can you expect that we would fare any better against our powerful enemy, the devil, if we don't resist? If we don't stand against? If we're not constantly on watch, attentive, vigilant? Friends, I hope you recognize that we're not going to fare any better than that unprepared soldier, than that unattentive prey. Now, this resistance, and I want us to go back. I hope you did mark James 5 or James 4. I want you to go back there a minute. This resistance that we're talking about, it has to be exercised daily. Again, there is no ceasefire. There is no, I think Brother Woods used the word armistice. There is no truce here. We have to constantly be on guard. Our resistance has to be constant. And it has to be exercised in every area of our lives. And that's why I want us to come back to James chapter 4, because I was privileged to hear Brother Melvin Otey preach a lesson from James chapter 4 on resist the devil. Now, that's just one verse, right, in the chapter. But in developing that subject of resisting the devil, Brother Otey, as he is so capable of doing, he made some practical observations and applications of that with the remainder of the contents of this chapter. And I wanted to call them to your attention because you're going to have to do this study on your own. You might, if you need help, I can probably get you a copy of the CD. But I just want you to listen to how comprehensive this is, how it touches our everyday life. And so here's what he did with James chapter 4 in connection with resisting the devil. What does that demand? What will it require of us? Verses 1 through 4 of James 4, he says, if you're going to resist the devil, you're going to have to control your carnal appetites. And that's what he's talking about, lust there. He's talking about how fighting and why fighting and wrangling goes on in the congregation, why they don't have what they're looking for. He's going to refer to them as adulterers and adulteresses, and that had to do with individuals that had become unfaithful to God. Why? Carnal appetites, and they failed to control them. Secondly, he said also, if you're going to resist the devil, verses 5 through 10, you're going to have to conquer your worldly pride. We already spent some time on pride this morning in the Bible class, right? Here, James, in this very context where he tells us to resist the devil, he's going to tell us to humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God. Pride. We're going to have to conquer worldly pride if we're going to resist the devil. Thirdly, and again, we introduced this one in our Bible class, verses 11 and 12, we're going to have to cancel harsh judgments against one another. If we're going to resist the devil, we're going to have to cancel harsh judgments. Speak not evil, verse 11, one of another, brethren. And you can read the rest. And then verses 13 through 17, if we're going to resist the devil, we're going to have to confront these reckless assumptions that we make. That we have all the time in the world to do whatever our plans are to do. Without thinking about God or whatever, thinking about the brevity of life, we're just going to make plans. And as I listen to those from Brother Otey, these are very practical applications of what it means to resist the devil. And it just impressed upon me the need for continuous vigilance in this area of resisting. It needs to be practiced. Why? Because we live in an ungodly world. And that ungodly world is continuously promoting the very things that we're trying to resist. Again, look at that list that he gave us out of chapter 4. Resisting the devil demands controlling our carnal appetites. You know what the ungodly world is doing? It's trying to incite our carnal appetites. Resisting the devil is going to demand conquering worldly pride. You know what the ungodly world does? It promotes pride. It celebrates pride. Again, resisting the devil is going to demand canceling harsh judgments. You know what the ungodly world does? It encourages that kind of censorship, that kind of judgment of others. And then fourthly, resisting the devil demands confronting our reckless assumptions, and yet daily we live among an ungodly world that regularly practices such assumptions, never giving thought to the fact that their lives may end, that they may face eternity today, just living for today and whatever future plans that they have made. And that just impressed upon me the need in resisting the devil, the need to be constantly doing that. It's going to come into play in every area of our lives, every day of our lives. And again, the devil is not going to take a day off, and neither can we. The ungodly world is going to be there, and we've got to be ready to resist. And as I thought about that, just trying to put it in some kind of one thought concept. Here's what I came up with. As I thought about those things, it brought me to this observation. Principally what we're talking about here in this area of resistance, principally it comes down to this. Brethren, we must resist the world's efforts to have us conform to its ways. That's what this is all about. If we are going to successfully meet the challenge of living godly in an ungodly world, what we're going to have to resist, yes, resist the devil, but the way we're going to have to resist him is resist allowing the ungodly world to mold us into its mold. And we find that by way of exhortation, don't we? Look at Romans chapter 12. Again, a familiar verse. In Romans chapter 12, this really is at the beginning of Paul's practical application of what he had set forth by way of doctrinal thesis in chapters 1 through 11. But now he says, I'm making an appeal to you. I'm beseeching you by the mercies of God that we have just presented, that you need to present your bodies a living sacrifice, verse 1, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. But now watch. And be not conformed to this world. That word conform means to fashion alike. I thought this rendering was especially helpful and easy to understand. One writer said, don't let the world around you squeeze you into its mold. And yet that's exactly what the enemy is attempting to do, is he not? That's exactly what this ungodly world that he uses, that he has control over, if you will, those people, that's what they are trying to do. They are trying to squeeze us into that same mold. And so what do we find? We find the devil pressuring us to conform to the world's values, right? Pressuring us to conform to the world's morals, the world's behavior, the world's trends in dress and speech, recreation. Again, every area of our lives. Here is the devil, by means of the ungodly world, trying to squeeze us into that mold. He's tempting us to conform to the world's view on the family, marriage, divorce, relationships. He's tempting us to see work like the world sees it, to see money like the world sees it, to see enjoyment like the world sees it. The devil is tempting us to look at religion like the world sees it. Acceptable attitudes and how we treat one another as the world sees it. Do you appreciate what I'm saying? I believe this verse really gets to the heart of what we need to do. We need to resist the devil from having us be conformed to the world, the ungodly world in which we live. And friends, there is not an area of our lives that is not impacted. The devil is constantly, through any method that he can at his disposal, he is trying to get us to conform to the world. And that is going to demand on our part resistance. And again, not half-hearted, not indifferent. Our resolve to stand against the devil and all of his strategy, all of his subtle ways to get us to conform to the world, it needs to be ever vigilant. It needs to be constant because he doesn't take a day off. He never offers us a ceasefire. Oh, he'll try to get us to compromise, but he's never going to say, okay, I'm just going to let you alone. I'm not going to try to pressure you anymore. I'm not going to try to squeeze you into the mold. No, there'll never be a day like that. And so that demands on our part, if we're going to meet this challenge, that's going to demand on our part the need to resist. Now I'm going to stop there. We will, Lord willing, move on to a fourth R next week. But before we do that, I just want to offer, at least in my judgment, please understand this has always been true. None of this pertains just to our day and age. I mean, it has always been necessary for the godly to live that way in an ungodly world, ever since sin has entered into the world. And I believe it's going to require on the part of any generation, any group of people, any period of time to recognize, to resolve, to resist. I believe these are all universal in application. Having said that, I'm inclined to believe that those today, as New Testament Christians who are determined to live godly lives in our current ungodly world, we face an element, we face a factor, we face a dynamic that really amplifies the need for this resistance. I'll leave you with that mystery and what I think that is and why I believe it deserves special attention and notice. But once I identify it, Lord willing, next week, I think you'll agree. Maybe not, but that's all right. I just want to let you know, for me, it speaks to, again, even greater need to resist. But as we conclude this morning, as a preacher of the gospel, as I learned from Titus chapter 3, I have a responsibility to do my best to encourage you to be ready to every good work. But please understand, as should be true of any preacher, before they ever present that by way of an encouragement to others, they should be making sure that they've given it attention themselves. I need to make sure I'm ready to every good work. And again, those would be many good works. But our attention is particularly focused on this one, living godly in an ungodly world. It is a good work, but it is a challenge for sure. And if we are going to be successful, we're going to have to resist. Have to resist the devil. And maybe you're watching this on our webpage, and maybe you're not a Christian. And For you to become a Christian, guess what? You're going to have to resist. You're going to have to resist the devil's attempts to discourage you from doing that for whatever reason, out of fear, out of the thought of failure, out of family considerations. There's going to be a lot of things that you're going to have to resist even to become a Christian, even to become numbered among the godly today. Because he knows if he can keep you from obeying the gospel, well, then you are among the ungodly. And he has you, if you will, at his disposal to be used to try to challenge others who are godly, trying to live godly. So I just want to prepare you for that. But I hope you recognize that the need for resistance comes with great reward. Because if you are willing to resist all of those objections that he's going to place in your mind, and you do obey the gospel, be the best decision you'll ever make in life. Because that will number you among the godly. And only the godly have promise of eternal life when this life is over. So if we can help you in rendering obedience to the gospel, if you know what to do, or maybe you still are uncertain as to what that demands of you, please contact us because we want to help you. But for those of us who are Christians, let's resist. Resist every day. Resist constantly.